sitting in the rain, waiting on the sun to shine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Castillo. I'm a librarian at Beatley Central Library in Alexandria, Virginia. I am very pleased tonight to present Writing for My Life with Maryland Poet Laureate Grace Cavalieri. And a little bit more about Grace. Grace Cavalieri is the author of 23 books and chapbooks of poetry and 26 produced plays. She produced and hosted The Poet and the Poem weekly on WPFW-FM from 1977 to 1997, presenting 2,000 poets to the nation. She now presents the series to public radio from the Library of Congress via NPR Satellite and Pacifica Radio. Cavalieri's many awards include the George Garrett Award for Service to Literature from the National Association of Writers and Writing Programs, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Washington Independent Review of Books, 2 Allen Ginsberg Awards for Poetry, the Patterson Poetry Prize, the inaugural Folger Shakespeare's Library Columbia Book Award for Service to Literature, and a silver medal from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Her papers are housed in the Gelman Library at George Washington University. Her latest book, Grace Art, Poems and Paintings from Maryland's 10th Poet Laureate, is a collection of poems and paintings created in lockdown during this past year of pandemic isolation and available from Poets Choice Publishing. And now I'll hand it over to Grace.
Thank you, Andrea and Georgia. It's really nice to see my friends. I'm going to be talking in 2 sections. The first part is going to be talking about poetry, and then I'm just going to stop a minute, and I'd love to hear about your writing life and anything that I say that reverberates with you. I'd like to hear your experiences. Then I'm going to dive into some poetry reading about women in history and how you get to women and how you research history to get there. So I'll begin by reading a poem, which is called How a Poem Begins. It's a little thing, could be the long O's in Kosovo, or a woman alone in the street after the hurricane sweeping Honduras. Perhaps we tell of a child beneath a flood in New Orleans, or feet bloody from walking the rubble of Afghanistan. They say poetry is insignificant, such a tiny voice no one can hear. Sometimes it says, I can't breathe. That's why we write of such little things, such insignificant things. Well, that's the way some of the world views us, but we writers know that poetry is the most significant thing in our lives, and that it is, I don't think it's too grandiose to call it a life force. I honestly believe that those of us who write poetry as practitioners find our energy flow from that source. And I believe that it is what keeps me going. Yesterday, someone said to me, you know, every time I write, I get into a place that is very special. I don't even know where it is or what to call it, but no matter how old I am or how many years go by, every time I write, I find that place inside of myself. That's a pretty amazing remark, I think. And so I'm going to tell you the things that I believe poetry does, why I am so addicted to this art. I think poetry rinses off language. I was in the 1st grade last month, and I said to the 6-year-olds, what if you had to wear the same clothes every day for a year? Wouldn't they get dusty and dirty? And they agreed. Well, I said, words are that way too. Words get dusty and dirty, and poets have to rinse them off. And you would be very surprised to know how poetry seeps and infiltrates into our everyday language. For instance, every newscaster you hear says, at the end of the day. Well, that's a line from Yeats. Little do we know how our poetry seeps in and helps to keep language fresh. So poetry rinses off language. The next thing it does is that it slows us down. I see Sue Silver here today, and I was telling her just this morning that if I click a button, I get to Hong Kong in 1 second. What does that say about time and space? What is happening? If things are speeding up that fast, then poetry becomes so much more valuable because you can't write a poem in a hurry. You can't dream in a hurry. You can't read a poem in a hurry. It's not a bad thing to slow down because then you notice things. You see that light on the leaf, and then the light jumps to the other leaf. And then you see the broken glass in the driveway, like William Carlos Williams saw. Then you see and notice things. You watch, you observe, and you appreciate nature. You couldn't do this if you didn't slow down. The next thing it does is it preserves the beloved. And ever since the ancient late Latin writers before Petrarch, the only record we have of humankind is from the poetry. They have land deals, they have, I'm sure, livestock, I'm sure they have documents, but the only record we have of what it is to be alive and human, the sensibilities, are in the poetry. And we continue that when we write heightened, when we're in a heightened state and want to write for a funeral or a wedding, we preserve the beloved. It's a time-honored method for poetry. In fact, I went into the schools in Paterson, New Jersey, and just try this. Go around and ask the kids who they would like to preserve, and it will break your heart. You will be so surprised what they say. I read, this is a rather long poem, so I'm only going to read a couple of lines from it. It's called A Poet in the Schools, Paterson, New Jersey. It's about this. We preserve the beloved. Ramon wants to preserve his father. He left us. He took care of me. He used to give me a bath. Luanda wants her baby sister, who is no longer here. Julio wants to keep forever his stepfather, who treats him equal, like his other son. Voices of the dream on the blackboard, the place behind it opening in a tattered classroom in Paterson, New Jersey. Here, take this pencil. I was waiting for you before you were born. All you have is what I give you, a poem that refuses to die. All I have is what you give me, the courage to try. So preserving the beloved is a valuable part of our life in poetry. And finally, my 4 pillars here, it makes us less lonely. And when you read something that a writer has said and you have felt that, you think, oh my gosh, that is exactly how I felt. Well, the writer says things that other people just think. And when you make that connection, you're no longer alone. And it is a marvelous thing to know that we all feel the same thing. In fact, every one of us has experienced everything. Every one of us has had betrayal, love, greed, guilt, happiness. Every one of us has had everything in different intensities. So if that is true, then why, as a writer, should I be afraid to tell my truth? If all of you have felt everything, doesn't that entitle me to be able to say anything? And if it does, then the next question is, how do we get there? And we all know that every one of us that has had these experiences, they're still inside of us. They have gone nowhere at all. The past is not past, it is the present. And all this is our database. All this is inside of us. We can go to this all the time. And everyone knows my elevator exercise, where I take people through the floors of their life as if their life is a building and there's a story on every floor. Well, all that is inside of you. You will never be without a story. Just go to any floor in your elevator and you've got something there. At the same time that we have this interior well, we're funnels. We like all day, we're grabbing images, listening to what someone said at the next table, writing down Oh, that red tree. Oh, I see that. Images gathering, collecting every minute. So here we are. We have this rich interior life. We have this world outside we're gathering. And so the equilibrium is on the page. It's a balancing act. And it is like living twice. To be a writer is the luckiest thing in the world because it is living twice. It is a very rich way to live. Now, I believe that writing is a moral life. That may sound self righteous, but I notice that all the writers I know are very concerned uh, and vigilant about what they say about other people. We personally, I don't think any art is worth a single person's feelings, frankly. But I think it's a matter of ethics where we're always making sure that we don't write something that will be hurtful. We also always have to be sure of who has earned our secrets. How much do we tell? So writers are always parsing forth the truth. They're searching for the truth every day in themselves and in their writing. And if you spend your life thrashing through, looking for the truth, I can't think of a better way to live. I would hope that people in high places would do as well. To live in search of the truth and put it in language is a very, very blessed, I think, way to live. Another thing I believe is that writers were wired a certain way the minute they were born. I truly believe this. Someday I'm going to prove it with some sort of test. I think every writer comes into the world and there's this big confusion and chaos. And they see those hieroglyphics on the page and they know if they could decode them, they would find some sort of path to make their way, some sort of way which is safe. If we can just get a hold of that language and control that language, we can be in charge of ourselves. And so I know that I have, well, I've interviewed 3,000 poets about, and in we'll be on the air 45 years in February. And if I'm still walking, it'll be half a century in 5 years, but we'll stop at so far 45 in February. And every poet I have interviewed says that they have written as a child. Now, isn't that something? Every single one of them. And I always have to act surprised because it is true. Writers are a certain breed. They come out understanding that the only way they can make it is if they can get a hold of language and make language work for them. I think that with all my heart. So I have written here, if your house is a mess, I know what I mean. Your house can be falling down all over the place. If you write a poem on your desk that stays there, don't you feel as if everything's okay? I mean, what great poet said, clarity out of chaos? That's what we're doing with our lives. We keep clearing the detritus away, the debris away, using language to seek our path. And I am so happy it's my given profession. Before I go into a mechanism, I want to say that writing brings joy. It sounds like a fancy thing to say, but I think that writing is where we get our joy. And I think that the reason we keep writing is that we want more. We want more. You know, everyone thinks that writers are OCD. You know, they always have to be writing. They always have to be writing on their vacations. No. Well, maybe OCD also, but we want the joy. We want the joy. Sue and I know this wonderful man who gave a speech, and he was talking about happiness and how fleeting happiness is. And he said that he always dreamed of owning a condo. And when he finally owned a condo, after a while, he realized it felt the same as when he rented it. So happiness is a new condo, but writing is joy, and joy is divine. and it makes everything we touch divine. So I seem to work in fours, and before I open the mics to see what you think, I'm going to give my 4 pillars of how I teach poetry, what I look for in the poem and in my own work. And that is the thinking, feeling, sensual, intuition, the 4 parts of the poem, and what is dominant in your poem and what needs work in your poem. And the thinking is easy. You know, that starts from the neck up. Everybody can do that. All your beginning students, their poetry sounds like letters to the editor, you know, because they're all thinky. And actually, the past poets of yesteryear who are very rhetorical are very easy to remember. That's why we memorize. If you can look around and all about you, you know, those poems are so easy because they're all thinky. And we're used to language being stepping stones. However, I think that in the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, it was a good thing for poetry because it upended the phrase. Rock and roll took our phraseology and broke it in half, and we suddenly had images that were, words were turned on edge, and there was more pointillistic thought. And I think rock and roll did a lot of good for American poetry. Well, at least it changed American poetry quite a bit. So the thinking part is fine. Then we teach them, though, about the sensuality in a poem. I was sitting on my deck, and it was a hot sun, and I felt this cool breeze on my cheek, and I felt, you know, how wonderful to have that feeling. Why should a poem go out into the world without such a feeling? Why should a poem not have taste and sound and smell? That's what we want in life. So why send a poem out deaf, dumb, and blind? So sensuality is so really important, as you know, with the visuals and the images. And then the feeling part. And the feeling part is word choice. It's diction. It's, are your words silvery stream, smooth wind, or are your words gash, scissors, gut, cut? I mean, the word choices are the tone of the poem. They are the weather of the poem. And you don't have to say, I am sad. The words can say that for us. The single bird, the rock alone. That can be said with addiction. But the final and the most, I think, intriguing part of poetry for me is the intuitive part. That is the hardest thing to teach, because intuition is, well, how do you know not to step on somebody's feet when you're talking to them? When you enter a room, do you bang open the door and knock down 3 chairs? Well, why would you enter a poem that way? So intuition is knowing how much to say, how much not to say, to trust the reader, that your reader is as smart as you are. Guess what? Your reader knows everything you know. So you just better believe that you're not the smartest thing in the world just because you're the one with a pencil. So if they know everything you know, then you don't have to say everything. You can trust them a little bit to bring something to the poem. So how much you give, that is intuitive, because if you don't give enough, that bridge will break down in the middle. And if you give too much, it's an axe in the head. So intuition is a very, very difficult thing. And I think the longer we write, the little better kind of we are with the feel of it. But I think all of our first poems probably weren't that intuitive. I really don't think mine was. So finally, I think that I would like to know if poetry is a life force for you. If you have any thoughts about questions about writing or publishing, I'm going to ask you to turn on your mic, and we'll spend about, whatever time it takes to hear what you are interested in, whether it's publishing or dreaming or writer's block or whatever it is. And after that, I would dive into my reading.
Okay, so yes, before we jump into questions, if as you naturally ask questions, that's fine. If we happen to run into the problem of 2 or 3 people trying to speak at the same time, I would encourage you to take advantage of the raise your hand feature. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom controls, you should be able to see something called reactions. And there is a feature for you to raise your hand. So we can try to see, give folks a chance. And if we run into too many people at once, we'll use this raise hand feature. So just click that raise hand, and then I will see that by your name, there's a little hand symbol, and then I will try to make sure that to get to everyone in the order I see your hand. So be patient with me if there are a lot of hands up. Grace shared a lot of great information. There's a lot to digest and talk about. So anyways, I see Lee has the first question, so I'll give the floor to you.
Lee is such a wonderful poet. Hi.
Oh, it's so nice to be here. And I just love the way you presented your 4 pillars. And I guess what I wanted to say, yes, poetry is a life force for me. And it seems to bring together everything I've always been interested in. And that was language. And I do mean other languages besides English. I also mean dance and choreography, music and drama. They all somehow come together in poetry for me. And I would just say that this season of being in confinement and having, to worry about COVID and the world situation, I think we have a responsibility as poets to be even more intuitive, more sensing, more feeling, and certainly thinking too. But thank you for bringing that all together in one concise 20 minutes.
Read Lee. Get Lee. Any other thoughts on your writing process or any process that you feel is broken or not?
Mine?
Anyone?
Yeah.
Yes, Isabella.
Let someone else talk.
Oh, sorry. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, I'm trying. Hi.
Okay.
It's really wonderful hearing you, and just so thoughtful, and just your approach to poetry is very inspiring. And first, let me say, as an Italian-American woman, I always look for people who have achieved your level of success. So I congratulate you on that.
And I congratulate you. Thank you.
Well, what I wanted to say is I wanted to concur with Lee, and that how poetry has kind of infused my other disciplines. So, my other writing, where, short story writing, and I had written a screenplay and my artwork. It's a way of life, really. And it's a language that you learn as a child. You're right. You're absolutely correct. And it forms your life. And the great thing is that when you can share it with others, then they can jump in. And especially with children, because I'm actually a retired teacher. And I just retired last year. So what you said was really wonderful. Thank you.
Amen. Amen, sister. Amen. The arts keep civilization from sinking into the mud because it is a spiritual practice, and spirit is a hydraulic. It is an actual thing. Spirit is not, even though it's invisible, it is real. And it keeps us all afloat. And the more that we create, making something that never existed before is an amazing thing. We take it for granted, but something didn't exist and then you make it exist. That's pretty damn good. That's holy work.
It's true. And during that process, when you're in the throes of creating something, the scene, the visualization of the feeling, the sensual approach, it's another world that you're creating.
Yes. Aren't we lucky?
Yeah.
Magicians. We're magicians.
Thank you very much. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Isabella. Bella Bellissima.
Grazie. Thank you.
So I actually am curious because I, in another life, was a reporter. So since you have that your radio show, The Poet and the Poem, I'd love to hear more about how you got started in broadcasting, preparing for your interviews, and if you have any favorite interviews that you've had over the years.
Mhm. Well, I'll try to consolidate it. When I was teaching at Antioch College in 72, Gail Bartlett is here, and she was my first student. Oh, I'm telling how old you are, but she was very young. She was just out of kindergarten. Anyway, I was teaching at Antioch College, and I was teaching poetry, and I realized that you could teach 20 in a class or 200 in a lecture hall, or what would happen if you could reach 200,000? Wouldn't that be amazing? And I heard about a radio station going on the air because they had been held back from litigation because they were too progressive. So I found out they were going on the air, and I hit them up and went to the manager, who luckily was a closet poet, like most people are. And so he was all for it. And I spent 4 years trying to raise money for the station. So I'm the moral of the story is you can do anything you want if you can raise the money. So to put poetry on the air, we went on in 1977 with Sterling Brown and the A Train, not the Star Spangled Banner. So you could see the tenor of the station. So I had poetry on prime time, finally, my dream. And once a year, I would have poetry on from 7 in the morning till 7 at night to make the point that there was not a poetry corner as on most public stations. So after 20 years, I got enough money to go national. And I took it to the Library of Congress as my place to record. So that's just a summary. I've done all the Poets Laureate of the United States since 86. And I've had a marvelous, you'll have to get my book called Life Upon the Wicked Stage, because it has 200 pages of things that I can't even summarize here. The most difficult one I've ever had was Allen Ginsberg. And the most frightening one I ever had was Louise Glick, because she stopped in the middle and got tired. And I've had just a miracle of things. It's all in my book, Life Upon the Wicked Stage. But I would like to say that SAS is connected with this publishing house, and it's called Alan Squire Publishing. Fabulous. Rosie Solari, my little sister, and Jimmy Patterson. So they put out these legacy series for poets who have done many genres. And so after we talk, I'll be reading from that book. And I just found that everyone had a poem. I had something called Dial a Poem on the air where people could call in their poems. And it was really amazing. I thought I knew what was out there. But I mean, I had drunks, prize fighters, taxi cab drivers, grandmothers. I mean, everyone had a poem, and we didn't have a bleep system. So I kept, every minute I was afraid they were going to unplug me. And I finally got to the point. So I conducted a writing workshop on the air. And I finally got to the point where I just was so, I just say, just keep writing. I mean, they wore me out. They really burned me out. The phone just came off the wall. People love to share their poetry. So anybody have a question about their own writing?
Oh, yes. And then I'll get to Anne. She's been patiently waiting. So thank you, Anne. But to go back to the book that Grace mentioned just now, the Other Voices, Other Lives, I have shared some links in the chat if you would like to purchase that book. It is back ordered on bookshop.org, but it is available on Amazon and indiebound.org if you prefer to look for a store near you that carries it. And I have it at the library as well. So you can check it out from Alexandria Library if you'd like to do that. So there are some options if you'd like to delve deeper. So,
thank you, Andrea. We love librarians.
And then Anne, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, we'd love to hear from you.
Anne Bracken? Are you on? Is it Anne Bracken?
Great. Hi, Grace.
Hi, honey.
I just wanted to say that I think in writing poetry for, I don't know, 10 or 12, however long years I've been writing it seriously, moving over into prose, I'm finding that everything I've done in poetry informs the prose writing that I do. So my sense of not not saying everything and trusting the reader to figure things out, my sense of how much to reveal, my sense of rhythm and pacing and word choice. I just think poetry has been incredibly useful as far as being able to write pretty good prose, I would say.
I would say so too.
So.
I've been reading your prose. Yeah, it is a magic ointment. I call it motion.
Yes.
Poetry is motion lotion. It
Mhm.
just creams up that prose.
And I'll also say that, you know, I can work both ways. Like I can go back to a poem that I wrote and tap into the emotional energy of that poem and then access that same emotional energy to write the prose piece. So it's been a really interesting process to go between the two genres.
That's really interesting when you say energy. That is so interesting because that energy is always on the page.
Mm-hmm.
That is what the reader gets, your energy. They don't just get your little ink blots. So that our breath on the page is the expansion and the compression of the lines is our breath, right? And our
Right.
breath is on the page. And we give our energy to people by reading our work. It is a miraculous thing that I don't think people are giving enough thought to the divinity of it, actually, and the physics.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what we do, how we touch each other through our energetic connections on the page. It's a marvelous thing to observe, and for you to acknowledge that is a very high principle, I think.
Thank you. You're my teacher.
Oh, you're my babe. You're my BFF. So, anything else?
You, Anne. I see that Dickie has a question.
Hi, thank you so much to my new friend Anne for inviting me to this. I'm a new poet and I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about the intuitive piece, the intuition, developing that. And I understand the other quadrants, but
Right.
a little more on that.
Yeah, that is just that when you say something, you don't have to say, I am sad, I am lonely, I am blue. You don't have to say what, exactly how you feel. You can believe that by indicating it, that your reader will get it. They're not dumb. Just to be intuitive means to trust the reader. That's all. Just trust them. And if you fall short, I'd rather fall short by saying too little than saying too much, actually. Because the more sophisticated the reader, the more they will bring a lot of stuff to it. They've got their own stuff they'll bring to the poem. So you're not alone in this. And if you just give them a spark, they will make a fire. So good for you, Dickie. I'll be watching what you do. That's great that you're starting to write. How long have you been writing?
About 5 months. I studied journalism at school, but my career took me somewhere else. And but it's always been there, just sort of waiting to wiggle its way out. And now I'm retired and have time to do that.
Exactly. Welcome to the world of earrings and paper. It's the way to live.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any final things? Those are good questions, I think. Really good. Very, very fundamental questions.
I'll just take this opportunity to thank everyone at Allen Squire Publishing. Sass Brown, who's here with us tonight, has been critical and excellent to work with in planning all of the programs. So Grace's program tonight is part of a series of 4 writers at Allen Squire Publishing, and she is the third in the bunch. So on June 3rd, We will have Richard Peabody joining us. We've already had Karen Watanabe McFerrin and Reuben Jackson, and we've been 3 for 3 for excellent speakers. So looking forward, and I will share some information about Richard's program in the chat before we leave. So thank you. And thank you to Rose and Jimmy, the co-founders of Ellen Squire Publishing. So everyone who has helped, make this event happen. Everybody's been wonderful. So thank you to everyone. And thank you for Grace for spending the evening with us.
This is the book, and they were smart enough to know that in Europe, people write in many genres and publish in many genres, but in America, we've been very puritanical about that. We publish prose or we publish poetry. So Alan Squires had this idea of the compendium. So in this book, there are my interviews, my poems, parts of plays. And so it's easy for me, so I can just carry one with me instead of 5 when I go someplace. So I am going to go into this book, and I love women in history. I love women because of what we have done. We are so incredible, and especially the ones in history that have been not noticed. This absolutely makes me crazy. For instance, in 1975, after raising 4 children, I went to graduate school and I studied 18th century literature, and I found Mary Wollstonecraft, the first woman to write a serious book in English. She didn't write frothy romance novels like many of them. She wrote argumentative prose with Thomas Paine and William Pitt about the French Revolution. Well, who knew her? I just couldn't believe this. Everybody knew her daughter, Mary Shelley, because she wrote Frankenstein and married the poet Shelley, and she got all the PR, but nobody knew her mother. So this cooked inside of me for literally 25 years. And in the year 2000, it just had to come out. So I spent a year researching her, and I will read a few things in this book. I have written a play about her also, which is called Hyena in Petticoats. And the title comes from someone who said, Edmund Burke said she was a hyena. And I have her saying in the play, I am not a hyena. Hyenas run in packs. I am very much alone. She thought that it would make women happier if she would talk in their defense, but it made their lots worse. Their husband took it out on them because she was influencing them. So she didn't have the men and she didn't have the women. So Reverend Clare taught her how to read. Now, when I wrote the play, I actually have Reverend Clare being a little licentious and seductive, because he, in a play, you have to have more twists and turns. I'll just say that. But here it is, straight. Reverend Clare teaching her to read. And all of these are poems in my voice about what I think she might have said, because historians knew what she did, but I thought I knew what she felt. Dear Reverend Clare, you ask if hope gets me up in the morning. I say yes, not in your house where everything exists, but in mine where all things are lost. The top latch takes the weight of the door, and so it is true as I teach Liza and Everina all that you teach me. You say my child's sense of wonder is coupled with a grown person's knowing grief, and why shouldn't it be? You are talking to a girl with a pencil hidden in a broken cup on top the highest shelf, stained by curdled cream behind a ceramic pitcher where it cannot be thrown away. She becomes a governess just to get out of the house. She goes to Ireland. And of course, she gets fired because she teaches Lady Kingsborough that her little girls are worth as much as the little boys are. And she gets in big trouble for that. So she's a terrible governess. And she goes to England, believe this, to be a writer with 12 guineas in her pocket. Now, I wouldn't go to New York with $1 in my pocket to be a writer, but that's the equivalent. So she goes to London. And luckily, Mr. Johnson gives her a job as a columnist in a newspaper. And she's writing political treaties in the newspaper. And if it were not for Joseph Johnson, we would not have Mary Wollstonecraft. We would not know her. So this is a letter to Mr. Johnson. Uncommon kindness is what I call you instead of publisher. Telling me I am the first of a new genus? I tremble at the attempt. You must not, on any account, inform my brother or father, for ridicule has always been the unfriendliest advice. The October winds blow through London, yet I hear only words exhorting my mission. I must be independent. When a writer writes, the words are taken by the reader, but they always belong to the writer. This body, an unwilling recipient for spirit, finally fills with a breath of confidence because of you. My luck is changing. Today I stubbed my toe and to the breaking said, "Thank you, life. I feel something besides terror. I have a body, a mind, a heart. I invite the world to lay its head on my stomach and listen." Of course, she meets Gilbert Imlay. She has lots of affairs. She's a bit of a slut, actually. And she was a sexual being, which was interesting and made my play very interesting because she wanted to be shoulder to shoulder with men and still make them love her. So that didn't work very well. So Gilbert Imlay stole her work, and she bore his child, and things were going so badly, she actually jumped off the London Bridge into the Thames. And her skirt billowed up, fortunately, and some fishermen found her as she floated to the top. And this is called Even Death Does Not Want Me. 3 weeks in bed, I cannot even plan a suicide well, it seems. Dear diary, you are all I have. Liza and Averina suffer because of my act. A death gone wrong, leading me this life as cold as the water. I remember the lifting. I closed my eyes and felt the sweet sweep, a swirling of relief, and then the noise, the lights, the clamor, cold cobblestones, people in a circle looking down, the bright lanterns, a rough blanket, a loud voice in my ear. Ain't that funny? Was her skirts what saved her, billowing up around her ass? And then a woman. Now she'll think twice of wearing pants. So poor Mary couldn't win. I imagine her in the square after her book is published. This is called Overheard Today. A vicious sound. Famous lady with her book telling us how to act. I could not hear the rest and leaned in closer to the murmuring until she straightened, and then I thought she spoke of me, Mary Wollstonecraft. She held my book Vindication and shook it at her partner. My face flushed. Were it a man speaking, I would not crumble, but now I fear my dream is uninhabitable. All women are in danger unless we pick the bough from the trees ourselves. Yet a stranger was condemning me in a public place. Why not grant me the courtesy given male authors, saying it is controversial? Her fury ascends in my body. She said I made her quest for survival all the worse because I can read and write. Does that give me a masculine mind or just a mind? So Mary had a very tempestuous life. She did meet a wonderful man, William Godwin, finally a philosopher who loved her for her mind. And she finally had the felicitous relationship she always wanted, but then she got pregnant. Well, she was pregnant before they married. They didn't believe in marriage, but they did go ahead. And she died in childbirth just because the doctors didn't wash their hands, blood poisoning. So she gave birth to little Mary Wollstonecraft, who would become Mary Shelley. But she lives inside of me because I feel what she feels. And in my play, I vindicate her. because I have her finally loving her name, where everyone used her name so hatefully. And that was the vindication that I had to achieve. And after that, I was watching television and I saw Anna Nicole Smith. And you remember that blonde who was a guest model, and everyone thought she was a train wreck. Well, she had less connections and networks than anyone ever. And she, I saw after she had her baby, she was on television and she had no makeup on and she had these beautiful cheekbones. And I saw what she could have been. All her life, she had been fed drugs by her handlers and she'd been propped up and been a buffoon. So, I mean, we saw her on a reality show where they put clown makeup on her and stuck her in a bathtub. Well, it broke my heart. So the book I wrote about her is called Anna Nicole Poems, and she is a bimbo. I mean, it is funny. There's a lots of stuff, but the play that was in New York, Blonde Glory, I called it, and I vindicated her by changing the ending of her life. Instead of having her die of an overdose, I gave her a wonderful ending. And I thought, isn't it great that writers don't make any money, but we can really change a narrative? And that's not a bad thing to do. I gave her a happy ending and a baby. Why not? So I love that play. It only was open for 2 days before the Sandy hurricane came in and wiped out New York. But it was the most beautiful. I had an Anna Nicole that looked just like her. She was fabulous. So I'm going to read a couple of these. So I have Anna in a room with her handler and her mother and her trainer and her manager, and it's called Notes from a Distant Glacier. Interviewer, do you want to be someone of worth or do you want to be famous? Designer, if they photograph you nude, it's called art. Critic, they should project her on the wall, the one way far behind us. Trainer, in life, there can only be one winner. Mother, would you please sit like a normal person? Manager, take a pill for God's sake, any pill, just do it. Doctor, no medicine can make you stop feeling. Lawyer, don't even think about it, Anna. Death doesn't care about you. You owe it to the world to make it pretty. Director, give them heart, give them breast. Lover, being a blonde beauty doesn't make you a whore necessarily. Anna looks out the window. She sees the pink azalea outside, so pretty, that color, so perfect. It must be fake. So Anna, this is called And Even More Than That. Anna was tired of her coloring book. She took a big fat red crayon and wrote shit all over the white wall. Then the pavement outside. Shit, shit, shit. She knew now what it was to be a writer. It felt good, cleaned out. Maybe she could write a whole book with her red crayon. That night she went out to dinner with the old man. He brought his daughter along. He held his arm around the dolly so tight. Anna tried to pry his fingers off, but it was no use. Her hunger flapping like a wet towel. Not his actions that saddened, but the flat, wet hand of grief against the hot cement of her heart. That's why she was glad she was a writer, insinuating herself upon the world, having her say. So naturally, she has to go to rehab, and in truth, she was institutionalized several times. This is called group therapy. The fat therapist in a red jumpsuit asked what made Anna happy. Anna said a hit of Coke and a shot of tequila. Then she flushed. Everyone was laughing. She thought she was allowed to tell the truth, how she lied on the manager's expense sheets, slept with people's husbands. She thought she could unburden her grief, but now she would shut up. The hell with this. Rescinda could just bring back her makeup kit and her Vera Wang gown. Anna stormed out. The sign on the doctor's door, if you walk through hell, you can climb your way to paradise. Dante. She would make an appointment with this Dr. Dante and settle his hash. Just one more. She goes to findalover.com to find a lover, of course, and she gets one. She rents a lover, and he comes in his armor, because he's going to rescue her. He's a knight in silver armor. And here's the poem. It's called Toy Town. At the edge of thought, a frozen pond melted. The guy in armor had taken it all off and was sitting on the floor sobbing. Anna never saw such a thing. She should run, tell him she was expected somewhere or someone was waited. She needed to be alone. This strapping brute of a man had suddenly become a minute creature shaking with shame. Anna knew she needed imagination for this one, but trained otherwise from birth, never had a chance. She tried to look serious. She tried to look dignified, but the naked man on the floor reduced her to simplicity. Could she name the problem? Name her darkness? The side of her sleeve was offered to his running nose, her field of vision blurred. He told her this was his first day on the job, and he couldn't go through with it. He was a PhD student working his way through anthropology. She bent down and took his head in her arms. Now what would she do with her unused understanding? There under the bed, she saw her other satin slipper. Somehow she knew it would fit. So poor Anna has a life on this page. And she is humorous, so I do use that. But the play literally had someone see what should be photographed in her. And that was a very happy time for me to write that. I feel very fulfilled. Now, Anna Nicole Smith came to me in my dreams, and she actually hugged me. And Mary Wollstonecraft has talked to me. And they're very grateful, actually, that I've done this. But then I started working on Madame de Staël. Now, this is my new book coming out in September. She was the most prolific 18th century writer in France. She wrote 30 books, 6 books of treatises, plays. And if you look up 18th century writers, she's not there. And so, boy, this is all I needed. This is all I needed. She was the most influential writer in France during the French Revolution. Napoleon hated her so much because her writing influenced politics. He exiled her from Paris. He turned her book printing presses from stopping her books. He chased her all over Europe with her children. So I was very interested in her. And I spent a year researching her. And I would just read one poem from this book. I'm happy to say that the photographer Dan Morano is offering his photographs of France and the Versailles to augment the poems. So it's going to be a really handsome book. Dan is a world-class photographer. So Madame de Staël, her father was the French, the minister of the treasury. And he actually caused the revolution because he messed up the money. But it was the time of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and Germaine de Staël was in the court. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. She slept with everyone. A psychic told me she was a nymphomaniac. I didn't put that in the book, but she slept with Talleyrand, she slept with Narbonne, she slept with Benjamin Constant, she really had a very active life. I don't know when she found time to write, but she had one lover after another. This is all, actually, everything I write is factual. The only things is it's in my voice, so it's fiction based on fact. So this is an actual letter she wrote to Benjamin Constant, who was a French-Swiss activist and in the court. Dear Benjamin Constant, for 3 years you have been my faithful visitor. How could I have thought of anyone other as you stood beneath my window that first night? That time I opened the door that has never closed. All others pale in loyalty and tenderness. And I received your contract today to always love, referring to me as the most significant person on earth. The fact that I was the one who dictated your contract for you does not diminish its validity in the court of ecstasy. The fact that I was the one who dictated your contract for you does not diminish its validity. I signed my name after I signed your name, with a seal wet from my lips. We need no judge or magistrate to enforce the law that was already bound by our intimacies. Yet I honor the fact that you are willing to sign your life to me on paper. Now I am yours and you are legally mine. This is the truth. She writes a contract and she signs his name and she signs her name. Who can make up this stuff? I mean, I didn't have to imagine much. So it's a very interesting look at the French Revolution through her bedroom, because I'll tell you, I totally couldn't understand the constitutionalists and the royalists and the Bourbons and the Republicans. So I just stayed in her bedroom. And all French history comes out of that portal, I promise you. So I'm going to end up with another contemporary.
Oh, can you repeat the name of your subject in your upcoming book?
Her name is Germaine, Germaine, Day, D-E, capital S-T-A-E-L. She married a baron from Sweden whose name was Holstein de Stael. And she stayed married to him during all of her liaisons. And finally he died. And then she had this pseudo marriage with Benjamin Constant. An interesting thing is in 1810, he snuck away from her bedroom and married someone else secretly, but then came back the next day. These people, their 18th century is incredible. And so the tumult during that time was unbelievable. The storming of the Bastille and the heading of Marie Antoinette. So it's all seen through her boudoir. And it will be called The Secret Letters of Madame de Stael.
Is it D-E-S-T and then S-T-E-A-L?
It's a little D-E.
Right, de Stael.
Then a blank, and then capital S-T-A-E-L.
Right. A-E-L.
You'll see it when you buy the book. It's on the cover. So another woman in history, and I'm going to end in a few minutes, is Big Mama Thornton. And when I was at WPFW in the beginning, it was so wonderful because all these people came. I met Betty Carter. I met Anthony Braxton. I met all of the great jazz people. It was a different station than the one today. It was really a hotbed of live music. And so years later, I saw Big Mama Thornton backstage. And this is a poem about this, a true story. Big Mama Thornton. Last time I saw her, she wasn't so big, actually. She was downright skinny, singing The Final Time in Washington, D.C. Backstage, she drank a quart of milk, mixed equal parts with gin. Seagram's, she told me. Then she got the idea, could I contact the Seagram's people and then she could advertise for them? And then they'd like her for drinking a full quart a day, their gin? I said, no, I didn't think so. And I didn't think the milk people would like it, the commercial, so much either. She still felt bad about Elvis stealing Hound Dog the way he did, even though she was much too much of a lady to say so. Once she talked about it long ago, before she started milk with gin. I guess the drink left a sweet taste in her mouth. So I do like to write about present day women. I think women keep the ship sailing. Look at these hands. They have held babies. They have made pasta. They have scrubbed floors. Look what we do. They write poetry. Look what we do. So I'm going to end with a poem that's in this book, Other Voices, Other Lives. And it is my mantra. It's called Work is My Secret Lover. Honestly, isn't it true? Can't you wait till Thanksgiving is over so you can't? Don't you want to run to your desk? Can't you? You just can't wait till Thanksgiving is over. And then you can go write. We're all that way, I know. Work is my secret lover. Here's an epigraph by Paul Zimmer that says, jazz men even refer to sex as work. Some primitive people believe that death is work. Work. Work takes the palm of my hand to kiss in the middle of the night. It holds my wrist lightly and feels the pulse. Work is who you'll find me with when you tiptoe up the stairs and hear my footsteps through the shadows. You'll see me lift my arm to stretch and then lean down to put my head to it. Work threatened to die once for all that was left unsaid. So I took it like a young bride, flushed with excitement. Adultery, too. Yes, I admit it. On all the holidays, when others gathered at the table, I was dreaming of it, making love to the movement of paper, the words from my lips, the feel of it. Sometimes when company came, I'd throw a tablecloth over my work and set the plates, and everyone acted as if nothing were visible, pretending I was the good hostess that I was. While on the Christmas tree, work waited patiently among ornaments gleaming like a groom. I am guilty as charged, for nothing else could buy my feelings. And why would I sell the only thing that ever loved me the way I loved back, but my beautiful, long-lasting, faithful lover, my friend who will never leave? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, my friends, for listening. I told Andrea, I don't think that these should go on much more than an hour because I think the audience gets tired. So I will end here. If anyone has a closing remark, we would love to hear it.
I say, we never get tired of hearing you read and express lovely words to us, dear Grace.
Lady Di, you've been a chief supporter of my life. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You've been with me every day.
You inspire me greatly.
Thank you. That's
Thank
what we want to do. We all inspire each other.
Thank you.
One long ribbon of song. Good night and thank you. Arrivederci.